We are at the foot of the mountain of Mount Sinai, receiving our Decalogue, the 10 Commandments from God. This awe-inspiring moment is a pinnacle moment in our collective history, but also at the core of our culture, an understanding of the world and how we function in it. And it is so incredible that thousands of years later, the founding fathers of this nation, those who established democracy in the United States for the first time, will use this moment to shape the entire legal system of this country and many others after it. And we get to call it our story, our identity-forming narrative. This Torah portion expounds on the laws around worship, serfdom, injuries. It continues with laws around property and moral behavior. And in chapter 24, it ends with what I think is perhaps the most important part of all. And it says, ויבוא משה ויספר לעם את כל דברי אדוני ואת כל המשפטים. Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of Adonai and all the rules. ויען כל העם כל אחד ויאמרו כל הדברים אשר דיבר אדוני נעשה. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that Adonai has instructed, we will do. And Moses went and wrote down the commands of Adonai. Now, I suspect, as I have heard from some before, that when we read this passage with our 2024 lens, we get the impression of being cult-like. We're blindly following God, because everything that God said, we will do. For some Jews, that's actually a very comfortable idea. There's comfort in having an all-knowing God and worshiping God. And for others, this idea can feel alienating. So I'd like to suggest that the idea of doing what God has instructed isn't meant to be blindly conforming, or that we should obey without interpretation. That's really too simple of a reading. Rather, this crucial moment of agreement was a collective contract. The Israelites chose to engage with God and with each other. It was a commitment, a promise that we would jointly care for one another based on the horrific trauma we suffered as slaves in Egypt and the journey escaping that hardship as a unified front. And we chose to go into partnership as one people, and as the text says, Bekol echad, in one voice. And truthfully, this Torah portion got me thinking about something that I have actually really been struggling with, particularly in the last few months, but definitely in the last few years as well. And I'd like to share that struggle, perhaps unburden it, so we can think about it together. In his article, What Reformed Jews Forgot to Teach Our Children, Rabbi Daniel Weiner talks about his Reformed Jewish upbringing and how it enriched his life. He speaks about going to summer camp and partaking in psychodramas about recreating key historical moments like the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem, the migration of early Zionist pioneers to Israel and others, such as the 60s post-civil rights Jewish experiential education around the freedom rides for voting rights throughout the American South. And he shares other examples, and then he fast forwards to reflect on the atrocities of October 7th and how some, too many, he argues, young American Jews have a disconnect from the state of Israel. Like me, he struggles with the fact that when young people were pushed to polarization, choosing between a commitment to human rights of the most vulnerable, in this case, the Palestinian people, or unqualified support of the survival of Israel, even in its defense against a genocidal attack by a terrorist group, too many of our young people defaulted towards the empathy for the perceived underdogs rather than rallying around our two criticized cousins in Israel of all faiths. He outlines what I actually believe to be three compelling arguments as to why this was. The first is the illiberal identity politics in higher education that flattens and really oversimplifies the world between oppressed and oppressor. To that, I actually also would add brown people versus white people, which deposits Israel on the side of settler colonialist. As an Arab Jew myself, whose family comes from North Africa, from Morocco and Tunisia, this argument is particularly painful, as over 50% of Israelis are of Middle Eastern and Sephardic descent, not to mention the over 2 million Arab Israelis who are categorically misplaced in the claim of a white Israel. He contends that this puts Jews more broadly as privileged beneficiaries of white supremacy. The second reason for the disconnect with Israel, he says, is because people in their 20s have only known Israel as a military government run by a right-wing corrupt prime minister and have never shared the lofty vision of its past enlightened leaders who risked so much to promote multiple offers of peace to our neighboring Arabs, only to be rejected each time and left instead with intifada and violence. And lastly, and perhaps more importantly, and here is where my heart is actually quite heavy, we failed our young people in teaching them too much about the conscience of the prophets and too little about the passion of the priesthood, meaning we rooted our majority of the Jewish identities in the universal call to social justice and put too little emphasis on balancing it with a particular pride and obligation towards Jewish peoplehood. Weiner courageously admits that this is a painful admission for him, and I personally understand. There's a lack of common cause and common bond with Am Israel, the Jewish people. We may have a passionate disagreement with Israel's current government, just like we do with our own sometimes, but can still have a deep connection to Israel. And this isn't to say that we should stop doing the important work of social justice. Quite the contrary. We must always do our part in advocating for what's right, but not at the cost of hiding a part of our identity to fit in with a greater good. I have many clergy friends and non-clergy friends who work in the social justice arena. For organizations that support a woman's right to choose, for Black Lives Matter movement, for renewable energy organizations that improve the life of refugees and other very important social justice causes. And I am so deeply saddened for many of my colleagues and friends whose partners in their work of social justice will not return their calls after October 7th, categorizing them as colonialists or supporters of genocide, completely effacing the work they did together to pursue a better world. Some of my friends have now shared with me that looking back, they have always had to conceal their Jewish identity or keep it on the back burner because it was somehow associated negatively with the work they were doing. Why is that? Why should Judaism not be at the forefront of the work we do and share with others? How many members of our community repair the world because they are Reformed Jews, and this is part of their core value system? Since when did being a Zionist, one who believes that Jewish people should re-indigenize the state of Israel, have a negative connotation? And perhaps worst of all, when did effacing or deleting a part of ourselves, any part of ourselves, in order to fit in, become acceptable? We should collectively be uncomfortable with this idea. When I spoke to my friend, Rabbi Lindsay Danziger, she shared with me that concealing Jewish identity and love for Israel has been an issue for years. She also provided an insightful alternative to this concern while working for the Religious Action Center of Ohio, which is the Reform branch of the Union for Reform Judaism. It's the social justice branch of the Union for Reform Judaism. She said she has found comfort in her social action workspace because she and her team make it clear with the different organizations they work with from the outset that if they are to work together on any social issue, any kind of discrimination of any kind or anti-Semitism would be unacceptable. Moreover, the organization must hold space where Zionists are welcomed and embraced. And she shared with me that one such organization that was welcoming to them and supportive with Rabbi Danziger and her team is the Planned Parenthood of Ohio. I'd like to make a parallel analogy for just one moment, perhaps a little trite, but I think similar. How many times do we share a story or a challenge we're having? And as we're narrating the story, we become our own worst condemnatory critics. And conversing with a friend, she shared that she was really frustrated with the decisions she made in interacting with somebody else. She called herself names, judged herself harshly, and was really committed to this terrible narrative that she pretty much created and sold herself. And at one point, I stopped her and I said, if your friend was in this situation, would you be so critical of her? Would you rebuke her so unforgivingly? And of course, her answer was, no. And I said, so please don't do that to yourself. There's something about canceling ourselves as individuals or as a group that has somehow become acceptable in our society, but doing it to someone else is unspeakable. Why the contradictory messaging? Weren't we always taught to lead by example? And I'd like to request of really all of us this evening, in partnership, and with all of us who have been deeply affected by October 7th, to continue to be unapologetically Jewish. And I have shared this message with you before, but now I'd like it to ring a little differently. Embrace your Judaism. Know what it means for you to be a Jew. And allow that to be an inspiration for making our world a better place, not just in social justice, but in our outer world, caring for our neighbors, our friends, caring for ourselves, for our community, and knowing the values of our tradition and living them meaningfully. Light Shabbat candles, even if it's too late or you only get to do it once a month. Invite a friend of a different faith to join you. And if you don't have a chance to do it because you have so many activities, bring 2 tea light candles to the soccer field, to ballet practice, the gym. Don't bring it to the gym, that's a bad idea. But other places where it's safe. Read the Torah portion of the week. There are hundreds and thousands of podcasts that exist that are approachable. Rabbi Google can give you the synopsis of any Torah portion, and ChatGPT can give you a 20-second breakdown of literally anything. Ask one different question about each holiday. Why are there 4 children represented at the Seder? Why do we break the middle matzah and not the top or the bottom? Why does the youngest child sing the songs first? Be curious about being a Jew, just as you are curious about everything else in your life. Being Jewish is an identity. It is not a program. It is not a one-off. It is not something we do in passing or just say that we are. It holds our history, our present, and our future. And we should never apologize or hide our Judaism. And tonight, we are so blessed to have our 5th grade families partake in our service. Yeah, you. We as a community, truly, have an obligation to be a part of these young people's lives. And they should expect it of us. They should have very high expectations of us. Take notes. Let's make being Jewish meaningful for them. Let's collectively think about what that Monday looks like after their B'nai Mitzvah ceremony. What does it mean for them to become Jewish adults? This week's Torah portion is Mishpatim, meaning laws. We receive the Ten Commandments, which has an inherent collective ideology. Let us together create a dedicated and steadfast Jewish community of committed individuals who are willing to be kol echad, one voice. And one voice is not to be confused with one opinion. We all know that's impossible, but a blessing, truly. We must be willing to listen and support one another in times of goodness and comfort and ease, as well as in times of difficult and hardship. Let us fashion a rich tapestry of rituals and culture to foster a deep sense of belonging and safety for all of our members, those of the next generation, where Judaism continues to be a sense of pride, joy, and inspiration for good. Shabbat Shalom.